He had always been someone who preferred to watch rather than speak. The world seemed to move too fast, too loud, and too eager for everyone to say their piece at the same time. He had learned early on that sometimes the loudest voice did not mean the wisest. On this particular day, he found himself standing at the edge of a busy office, a place filled with people who were in a rush to make themselves seen and heard. The hum of conversations, the clatter of keyboards, and the occasional ringing phone made it feel almost impossible to focus. But he could focus. He always could. He was waiting for something important, though at that moment he didn't know exactly how it would happen. He had been told to wait his turn, and he nodded quietly, though inside, he felt the familiar tension of impatience trying to rise. He had seen this before. People being asked to wait and feeling overlooked, frustrated, or dismissed. He had felt it too countless times. But something inside him had changed. He had learned to treat waiting not as a punishment, but as an opportunity. As he stood there, he noticed how everyone around him acted differently. Some people hurried past without even a glance, their minds focused on what they thought mattered. Others whispered and pointed, casting glances that seemed almost curious, almost searching for a story they could make theirs. There were a few who noticed him, but they looked away quickly, unsure if they should acknowledge someone who didn't demand attention. It was a small, invisible dance, and he knew every step. He remembered a time when waiting had been unbearable. Years ago, he had tried to speak up in a meeting, to share an idea he thought could change the course of a project. He had been interrupted, told to hold off, and felt the hot sting of embarrassment. But he had watched quietly as others rushed forward with suggestions, some of which he knew were not fully thought through. By the end of that meeting, his quiet patience had given him a perspective no one else had. When the opportunity finally came to present his own idea, it landed with precision and everyone listened. That memory comforted him now. In the office, he could feel the energy of people around him. Some were eager to claim their place, leaning over desks, raising voices, trying to prove their worth. Others seemed defeated, shuffling papers and sighing, waiting for something they couldn't name. He blended into neither group completely. He had learned to observe without being consumed, to measure without reacting, and to understand without judging. It was not always easy. There were moments when impatience gnawed at him, whispering that he should push forward, that he should not be invisible. But he had learned to recognize those whispers as the noise of the world, not commands he had to follow. He took a deep breath and let his mind settle on what mattered. The thing he wanted, the chance he waited for, was not about being seen as better than anyone else. It was about doing the right thing at the right moment. And for that, waiting quietly was more powerful than speaking too soon. He could see now that the people who pushed, who demanded, who tried to rush ahead, often stumbled. Their energy was loud, but it was scattered. They sought recognition, but they did not always understand the weight of what they were trying to achieve. The man in the corner of the room, who everyone ignored, seemed almost invisible, yet he noticed everything. A misplaced paper here, a hurried decision there. He watched how people reacted when confronted with mistakes or delays, and he cataloged it silently. Every gesture, every word, every glance told him something important. He had learned to read people the way others read books, and in that he found power. Not the kind that made people stand up and cheer, but the kind that made results happen quietly and effectively. Time passed, but he hardly noticed. He was in his element. While others fumed or fussed, he observed. A colleague rushed by, nearly knocking over a stack of files, muttering apologies without really stopping. Another whispered harshly to someone about a deadline they had missed. In both cases, the reactions were immediate and emotional, but he noted the patterns. He saw where tension rose and where it could be calmed. He saw how small actions led to larger outcomes, how patience and understanding could shift things more than force ever could. He remembered his own life outside the office, how the lesson of waiting had carried him through difficult moments. There had been times when he had wanted to speak up, to correct a misunderstanding, to demand what he believed was fair. But in those moments, he had learned that silence could be a shield and a strategy. People often underestimated him because of it, and that was fine. They underestimated him until the moment when his words, actions, or insights could not be ignored. The room was now buzzing with activity as people moved around, some frustrated, some excited, and he remained calm, the eye in the center of the storm. He could feel the quiet inside him, steady and deliberate. It was not emptiness or hesitation. It was preparation. Every second he spent waiting, he gathered more information, more understanding, more clarity. And in his quiet, he felt a growing confidence that his turn would come, and when it did, it would matter. A voice finally called for him, though not with fanfare or ceremony. It was simple, direct, a small acknowledgement that his time had arrived. And he walked forward, steady and calm. The quiet that followed his decision to wait was not weakness. It was strength, measured and deliberate. As he moved, he noticed glances from those who had rushed past him earlier. Some were confused, some were impressed, and some were just surprised. But that did not concern him. He did not need their understanding or approval. What mattered was the moment and what he would do with it. In the days that followed, people would notice a change. Not in how loud he could be, but in how effective he was. The small decisions he made, the careful observations, and the measured words would make a bigger difference than any immediate rush could. And though he remained quiet in many ways, there was a new energy around him. The quiet that had once been mistaken for submission was now recognized as patience and skill. And he knew, as he had always known, that sometimes the best answer is not to shout, but to wait, watch, and act with purpose when the time is right. He reflected on all this silently, knowing that waiting was not passive. It was active in a way that few could understand. Every moment spent observing, every moment spent listening, every moment spent thinking, added to the power of his eventual action. And that understanding, that quiet knowledge, was his answer. He did not need to say it aloud. The world would see it soon enough. He stepped into the room, his footsteps quiet, measured. The room was bright, filled with people who were speaking quickly and gesturing with their hands as if they could will the world to move faster. He noticed the way they all seemed anxious, each trying to prove something to someone else. Some were laughing too loudly, trying to appear confident, while others whispered nervously, hoping no one would notice their uncertainty. He moved among them with calm, taking in every detail without making a sound. Every glance, every gesture, every small movement told him a story that no one else seemed to see. The person who had told him to wait his turn watched from a distance, perhaps expecting frustration or anger, but he felt none of it. Instead, he felt a quiet determination, a steady calm that came from knowing that every moment of waiting had given him an advantage. His mind replayed every interaction he had observed, every mistake and every opportunity that others had missed. He understood more than they realized, and he knew exactly what he wanted to do. The quiet that followed his waiting was his tool, and he wielded it carefully. As he moved closer to where the decisions were being made, he noticed a colleague struggling to explain an idea. Their words stumbled and faltered, and their hands shook slightly as they tried to make a point. Others around them interrupted, offering quick fixes or dismissive suggestions. The room was filled with noise, with people competing to be heard, but he remained still, listening and watching. He could see the gaps in their logic, the places where their arguments fell apart, and he waited patiently for the right moment to step in. Time seemed to stretch as he observed. People were impatient, glancing at clocks, tapping their feet, and sighing loudly. He could feel the tension in the air, the frustration building in those around him. But he remained unaffected, his quietness a shield that kept him grounded. He had learned to use the stillness as a strength. While others rushed to fill the silence with words, he used the time to gather insight, to understand the situation more clearly, and to prepare for the moment when his turn would come. He remembered a lesson from long ago, from a time when speaking too soon had led to mistakes he could have avoided. He had been eager to show what he knew, to prove that he was capable, but in his haste, he had overlooked details that later caused problems. The memory of that failure had taught him the value of patience. Now, he knew that waiting was not a sign of weakness but a strategy. It allowed him to see the bigger picture, to anticipate problems before they arose, and to act with precision when the time was right. A small group gathered nearby, discussing a project with energy and urgency. They spoke over one another, each trying to assert their opinion. He listened closely, noticing inconsistencies in their plans and assumptions. While they were focused on immediate action, he considered the long-term effects, the outcomes they had not thought through. He could see where their excitement might lead to mistakes, and he knew that when he spoke, he could guide the conversation in a way that others could not. Someone glanced in his direction, curiosity flickering across their face. Perhaps they wondered why he had remained quiet for so long. They might have thought he was unsure, hesitant, or even uninterested. But he was none of these things. He was observing, learning, and preparing. He understood that true power often came from restraint, from holding back until the right moment to act. And he was ready for that moment. As the discussion around him grew more heated, he noticed subtle signs that others had missed. A colleague's hands trembled slightly when they tried to present an idea, indicating nervousness. Another spoke confidently but avoided eye contact, revealing doubt. Yet another insisted on a particular plan without considering alternatives, showing stubbornness. He cataloged all of these details silently, knowing they would help him when it was finally his turn to contribute. Minutes passed, and the room's energy shifted. Some people began to tire from the constant talking, their voices losing strength. Others grew more impatient, their gestures becoming sharper and more abrupt. He remained steady, his presence calm and deliberate. He felt a growing confidence, a quiet satisfaction that came from knowing he had understood more than anyone else in the room. His patience had allowed him to see the real dynamics at play, and now he was ready to act. Finally, a pause came in the conversation, a brief moment of silence that seemed almost accidental. It was the opening he had been waiting for, though he did not rush. He stepped forward, his movements calm and unhurried. When he spoke, his words were measured, clear and confident. He addressed the points others had missed, clarified misunderstandings, and proposed solutions that were both practical and thoughtful. His quiet had been mistaken for passivity, but now it became evident that it was the foundation of his insight. The room fell into a different rhythm. People who had been speaking loudly and insisting on their ideas now listened. Some nodded in recognition, realizing that his points made sense. Others were surprised, perhaps even a little embarrassed that they had overlooked the obvious. His patience and quiet had not gone unnoticed, and it was changing the dynamics of the room. The very energy that had once seemed chaotic now began to align with his clarity. He noticed the reactions around him but did not let them distract him. He continued to speak with calm authority, presenting ideas and suggestions in a way that drew people in rather than pushing them away. The quiet strength in his demeanor encouraged others to think more carefully, to consider perspectives they had ignored, and to engage in a more thoughtful discussion. By holding back until the right moment, he had created a space where his voice mattered more than it ever would have if he had spoken too soon. As the conversation continued, he found himself guiding the group gently but firmly. He asked questions that prompted reflection, highlighted potential problems, and offered solutions that were simple yet effective. People began to trust his judgment, even those who had initially dismissed him. His quiet had become a tool for influence, a way to lead without commanding attention. It was subtle, powerful, and transformative. By the end of the session, the outcome was clear. The group had moved from confusion and disarray to a place of understanding and purpose. His contributions had shaped the direction of the discussion, and the results were better because he had waited. The quiet that had followed his patience was no longer just an absence of noise. It was an answer, a presence that carried weight and meaning. As he left the room, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He had not needed to rush, to raise his voice, or to assert himself aggressively. The careful observation, the patience, and the quiet determination had allowed him to succeed on his own terms. People would remember his contributions, though perhaps not immediately. The impact of his actions would unfold over time, quietly but powerfully, just as he had intended. Outside the room, he paused for a moment, taking a deep breath. The world continued to move around him, loud and impatient, but he felt grounded. He understood that the strength he had shown was not about being the loudest or the fastest. It was about choosing when to act, about understanding the environment, and about using patience as a tool for change. And in that understanding, he found not just success, but a deeper sense of purpose and confidence that would carry him forward in the challenges yet to come. He walked back to his desk after the meeting, his mind replaying every detail. The energy in the room had shifted noticeably when he spoke. People who had been dismissive before now looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. He did not seek their approval, but he noticed the change. It was subtle, a shift in posture, a pause before interrupting, a careful consideration before replying. He felt a quiet satisfaction. The patience he had exercised had begun to bear fruit. As he settled into his work, he reflected on how waiting had given him an advantage. While others rushed and pushed, he had watched, listened, and understood. He knew what they valued, what they feared, and what they overlooked. Each observation added to a map in his mind, a map that guided his actions without haste or force. His silence had allowed him to see patterns that others missed, patterns that now shaped his strategy. He thought about the people around him. Some were quick to speak, always eager to demonstrate knowledge or assert authority. They often overlooked the details, the small clues that could indicate a better path. Others were quieter, but lacked confidence, hesitant to step forward even when they had insight. He found himself somewhere in between. His quiet was intentional, his confidence measured, and his actions deliberate. He had learned that being thoughtful and patient could be more influential than being loud or forceful. During the day, he noticed moments where his silence continued to serve him. A colleague made an error in a report, rushing to submit it without proper review. Another suggested a plan that ignored key factors. He observed without immediately intervening, noting the reactions of those involved. He could see the stress rising in some, the frustration in others. The situation had the potential to spiral, but he remained calm, knowing he could guide it when the time was right. By the afternoon, the office had grown quieter. The earlier chaos had settled into a rhythm, but underlying tensions remained. He observed these subtle currents, understanding the motivations of his coworkers, the pressures they felt, and the mistakes they were likely to make. Each observation was a piece of a larger puzzle. While others were focused on immediate concerns, he considered the broader implications of each decision. His patience allowed him to anticipate challenges and prepare solutions quietly. He remembered a similar moment from years before. He had been in a different team, facing a challenge where everyone else acted quickly and loudly. The results were messy. Mistakes were repeated, and frustrations grew. He had kept silent then, observing and learning, and eventually he had stepped in with clarity, guiding the group to a better outcome. That experience had taught him the value of timing, of knowing when to act and when to wait. Today, he relied on that lesson again. As the day wore on, an opportunity arose. A problem emerged that required careful thinking, something that others had not yet fully understood. Some rushed to offer solutions, their voices high and insistent, but he noticed the flaws in their approaches. He waited, letting them speak, letting them reveal gaps and errors. In that moment, his patience was not passive. It was a strategy, a deliberate choice to observe before acting. He knew that when he spoke, his words would carry weight because they would be informed by insight and understanding. He stepped forward quietly when the room reached a natural pause. His words were calm, clear, and precise. He addressed the core of the problem, offering solutions that were practical and thoughtful. People listened, some nodding in recognition, others surprised by the clarity he provided. His quiet had been mistaken for hesitation or passivity, but now it became evident that it was the foundation of his understanding. He did not need to raise his voice. The weight of his observations spoke for him. The reactions around him were subtle but telling. Colleagues who had dismissed him before now looked at him differently. Some hesitated to speak, considering his points carefully. Others began to follow his suggestions, implementing them with precision. He observed all of this without pride or ego, understanding that influence did not come from force but from clarity and insight. His silence had allowed him to see what others could not, and now it guided the actions of those around him. As the afternoon continued, he found himself in small conversations, quietly advising and supporting his co-workers. They asked questions, seeking his perspective, and he answered thoughtfully, never rushing, never pushing. The trust that had begun to form was built on the consistency of his calm presence. People began to rely on him, not because he demanded it, but because they recognized the value of his careful thought and measured action. He noticed patterns emerging in how people worked together. Some responded well to his quiet guidance, adjusting their approach and improving results. Others were slower to adapt, hesitant or defensive, but even they began to see the benefits of pausing, reflecting, and considering before acting. He saw that his influence extended beyond immediate decisions. It was changing the way people approached problems, encouraging thoughtfulness and patience. As the day drew to a close, he reflected on what had happened. The quiet that had followed his patience had not gone unnoticed. It had shifted the energy in the office, altered interactions, and led to better outcomes. He understood that waiting and observing was not passive. It was an active strategy, a way to understand, guide, and influence without force. The power of quiet was subtle but undeniable. He thought about the lessons he had learned over time. Life had shown him that those who rushed often stumbled, those who demanded attention often missed details, and those who acted impulsively often regretted their decisions. He had learned to measure his actions, to choose when to speak, and to let silence do some of the work. His patience had been tested, but it had always proven valuable. Today was another confirmation of that truth. Walking home that evening, he felt a sense of calm satisfaction. He did not need recognition or applause. The results spoke for themselves. People had listened, learned, and acted in ways that reflected his quiet guidance. He had influenced without force, shaped outcomes without demanding attention, and achieved clarity without rushing. The quiet that had followed his patience was not just an absence of sound. It was a presence, a force that guided, supported, and informed. He understood that the world valued action and speech, but he also knew that true impact often came from restraint, observation, and thoughtful intervention. The lessons of patience, quiet strength, and careful timing were not just strategies for work. They were principles for life. And as he looked at the city lights reflecting in the dark streets, he felt a deep sense of confidence that he could face any challenge with the same calm, quiet, and deliberate approach that had served him so well. The day had proven something he had always known. Sometimes the most powerful action is to wait, to observe, and to act with insight. The quiet that followed his patience was his answer, and it spoke louder than any words ever could. He arrived at the office the next morning with a calm determination that was different from the usual hurried energy around him. The day promised challenges, and he could feel it in the air. People were talking faster, moving faster, and trying harder to be heard. Some were frustrated, others excited, but he moved through it all quietly, like someone who had seen the storm before and was ready for it. His quiet strength was invisible to most, but it gave him clarity that others lacked. The first problem of the day emerged almost immediately. A project that had seemed simple had become complicated overnight due to miscommunication and rushed decisions. The team was in disarray, voices raised, suggestions clashing, and tempers flaring. Most people tried to push solutions quickly, afraid to waste time or lose credit. He watched, calm and focused, letting the chaos unfold. He understood that rushing now would only make the situation worse. Observation was more important than action at this moment. He noticed the patterns that others could not see. One colleague repeated mistakes that had been pointed out before, another ignored critical data, and a third insisted on a plan without considering alternatives. The room was full of noise and motion, but in that noise he saw clarity. The gaps, the weaknesses, the overlooked details. All of them were opportunities. He did not act immediately, knowing that the right intervention at the right time would have far more impact than speaking too soon. As the tension grew, some people began to look at him. There was curiosity in their eyes, a subtle acknowledgement that his silence was not indifference. Some even whispered to one another, questioning why he had not joined the chaos. But he remained calm, letting their impatience reveal more than their words could. Every reaction was a clue, every gesture a piece of information that would guide his eventual response. His patience was deliberate, a strategy honed over years of careful observation. The opportunity came when the team reached a point of deadlock. Suggestions had been repeated, arguments had grown heated, and frustration hung in the air like a storm cloud. No one could see a clear way forward. At that moment he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. He summarized the situation, highlighting the errors, the risks, and the overlooked possibilities. Then he proposed a solution that addressed the root of the problem, simple but effective, practical but thoughtful. The room went silent. People who had been loud moments ago now listened. The energy shifted subtly but noticeably. The quiet that had followed his patience became a presence in the room. He did not need to raise his voice or demand attention. The weight of his words, informed by careful observation, carried authority naturally. People began to nod, understanding what he had said, and some even began to see the mistakes they had been repeating. He guided the team through the implementation of the solution. He asked questions, suggested adjustments, and anticipated potential pitfalls. His calm presence helped others focus, think clearly, and act deliberately. The difference was stark. Where earlier there had been chaos, there was now order. Where there had been tension and frustration, there was focus and cooperation. His quiet had created a space where productive work could happen, and the results spoke for themselves. As the day progressed, more challenges arose. New problems, unexpected delays, and differing opinions tested the team. Each time he observed, waited, and intervened at the right moment. His patience allowed him to understand the dynamics of the group, the strengths and weaknesses of individuals, and the pressures each person faced. By acting strategically, he helped navigate each challenge with minimal conflict and maximum clarity. His quiet was not an action. It was a way of directing energy, of shaping outcomes without force. Colleagues began to notice the difference. Some expressed gratitude quietly, acknowledging his insight without fanfare. Others seemed surprised, perhaps even slightly embarrassed, realizing that they had underestimated him. Yet he did not seek recognition. The satisfaction came from seeing results, from witnessing the transformation of confusion into clarity, disorder into cooperation. His quiet patience had not only solved problems but had subtly changed how people worked together. By late afternoon, the biggest challenge of the day arrived. A critical decision needed to be made, one that could affect the success of the entire project. Voices rose, opinions clashed, and tension spiked. Many were ready to act hastily, hoping to claim credit or resolve the issue quickly. He stood back, observing the situation carefully. He noted the patterns, the arguments, the assumptions, and the emotions driving each person. He could see where the mistakes would come from, and he waited for the right moment to speak. When the moment came, he stepped forward calmly. He addressed the core issue, presenting a solution that balanced practicality with insight. He highlighted the risks that others had overlooked and offered ways to mitigate them. The room went quiet again, but this time it was different. There was focus, attention, and trust. People listened because they recognized that his words were grounded in understanding and patience. His silence had been a tool, a way to ensure that when he spoke, his voice would matter more than anyone else's. As decisions were made and actions taken, the results quickly proved the wisdom of his approach. Problems that had seemed insurmountable were now manageable. Mistakes were avoided, misunderstandings corrected, and the team moved forward with renewed confidence. The quiet that had followed his patience became a force for clarity and effectiveness. He did not need to dominate or command. The results spoke louder than any display of force could. He reflected briefly on the day, understanding that his approach was not just about solving immediate problems. It was about influencing behavior, shaping decisions, and guiding outcomes through thoughtful action. The quiet that had followed his patience was a presence, a subtle authority that changed how people interacted, how they considered options, and how they approached challenges. It was a lesson in the power of timing, observation, and restraint. As he left the office that evening, he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. The challenges of the day had been met, the team had performed better than expected, and the solutions had been implemented successfully. He knew that the impact of his quiet patience would last beyond this day. People would remember not just the results but the way they had been guided without force, the way clarity had emerged from calm observation, and the way one person's thoughtful patience could influence the outcome of many. Walking through the quiet streets on his way home, he reflected on the lessons of the day. The world valued action, speed, and assertiveness, but he had shown that careful observation, strategic patience, and deliberate action could achieve far more. He understood that waiting was not passive, that silence could be powerful, and that timing was often more important than urgency. His quiet had become an answer, a demonstration of strength, insight, and understanding that others could not match. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, moments where impatience, noise, and hasty action seemed like the only options. But he also knew that his approach, observing, waiting, and acting at the right moment, would continue to serve him well. The quiet that had followed his patience was not just a tactic for work, it was a principle for life. And as he looked at the city lights reflecting on wet streets, he felt confident that the right moment would always reveal itself to those who were willing to wait, watch, and act with clarity. The morning began quietly, almost deceptively so. He arrived at the office feeling the weight of the previous day's lessons and experiences. There was a calm energy around him, a confidence built from observation, patience, and careful action. The team was already busy with their tasks, voices rising and falling as they coordinated, debated, and problem-solved. He moved among them with ease, absorbing the details, noticing tensions, and understanding the subtle shifts in dynamics. Every glance, every pause, every gesture told him something important. The day presented several challenges, some small, others significant. He noticed a colleague struggling to explain a process to a new team member, stumbling over details and becoming flustered. Others offered advice, but it was rushed, disorganized, and incomplete. He watched silently, taking in everything, letting the situation unfold. His quiet observation was a kind of preparation. By noticing the gaps and errors, he could respond with clarity at the perfect moment. He did not need to intervene immediately because timing would determine the impact of his words. As the morning progressed, another problem emerged. A set of reports had discrepancies that were overlooked the day before, and the team was beginning to feel the pressure. Voices grew louder, suggestions clashed, and frustration mounted. Some were ready to make quick fixes without full understanding, but he remained calm. He noted every detail, considering the potential consequences of each action. His patience allowed him to understand the situation more completely than anyone else in the room. Finally, a natural pause appeared in the conversation. He stepped forward quietly, his presence unassuming yet firm. He summarized the situation succinctly, highlighting the errors and the risks that others had missed. Then he proposed a plan that was both practical and insightful, one that addressed the immediate problem and prevented future issues. The room went silent as people listened, recognizing the value of his approach. He had not shouted, rushed, or demanded attention. His quiet had prepared the way for clarity and effective action. As the day unfolded, he guided the team through the implementation of his plan. He asked questions that encouraged reflection, suggested small adjustments to optimize results, and anticipated challenges that others had overlooked. His calm presence encouraged the team to slow down, think carefully, and act deliberately. Where there had been chaos and frustration, there was now focus and collaboration. The quiet that followed his patience was no longer just absence. It was a force shaping outcomes. By mid-afternoon, the biggest challenge of the day appeared. A critical decision needed to be made, one that could affect the success of an important project. Voices rose, arguments were repeated, and tension escalated. Many were eager to act quickly, hoping to assert influence or resolve the problem first. He watched carefully, noting the motivations, the weaknesses, and the missteps. The situation demanded insight, not speed, and he understood that the right moment to act was approaching. He waited, quietly observing as others pushed and argued. Their impatience revealed the gaps in their understanding, the blind spots they could not see. When the time came, he stepped forward. His words were calm, deliberate, and precise. He addressed the problem directly, clarified misunderstandings, and proposed a solution that was both simple and effective. The room went silent again, but this time it was a silence of attention, of focus, of recognition. The quiet that had followed his patience had become powerful, shaping decisions without force or dominance. The team responded immediately. They implemented his suggestions with care, double-checked details, and adjusted their approach according to his guidance. Mistakes that would have caused setbacks were avoided, and the project moved forward more efficiently than anyone had expected. The impact of his quiet observation and timely action was clear. He had influenced the group without demanding attention, had guided outcomes without conflict, and had created a space where productive work could flourish. As the day came to an end, he reflected on what had happened. The results were tangible, but more importantly, the process had changed. People who had previously rushed or argued now paused, considered, and collaborated. They had learned, unconsciously, the value of patience, careful observation, and timing. His quiet had not only solved immediate problems but had subtly reshaped the behavior and approach of those around him. The silence that had followed his waiting had become a lesson in itself. Walking home later, he thought about the lessons of this week. Life often rewards those who act quickly, those who speak loudly, those who demand attention. But he had seen that true impact comes from understanding, preparation, and measured action. Waiting, observing, and acting at the right moment created results far more lasting than impulsive decisions. The quiet that had followed his patience was not weakness but strength. It was not passivity but strategy, and it had proven its power once again. He remembered times in the past when impatience had led to mistakes, when hasty words or actions had caused confusion or frustration. Those memories reinforced the importance of his approach. Patience allowed him to see what others could not, to act with clarity, and to influence outcomes without force. The quiet that followed his careful waiting had been his answer, a demonstration of insight and strength that spoke louder than words or noise ever could. By the time he reached his apartment, the city was quiet, the streets calm, and the night settled. He felt a deep sense of satisfaction, not from recognition or praise, but from knowing that his actions had made a meaningful difference. People had learned, projects had succeeded, and he had remained true to his principles. The quiet that had been his companion throughout this journey was now his affirmation. It was the proof that patience, careful observation, and deliberate action could achieve what force and haste never could. He sat by the window, looking at the city lights reflecting on wet streets. The lessons of the week played in his mind: to observe before acting, to wait for the right moment, to speak with purpose, and to let quiet carry weight. He understood that life would continue to present challenges where impatience and noise seemed dominant. But he also knew that his approach would continue to serve him, allowing him to navigate complex situations with clarity, influence, and calm. The quiet that followed his patience was his answer, and it would continue to guide him in every challenge yet to come. The satisfaction he felt was subtle but profound. It was not about recognition, applause, or immediate reward. It was about the understanding that careful patience, deliberate observation, and thoughtful action could create real impact. The quiet that had followed his waiting had taught more than any loud argument or rushed solution ever could. It had taught the team, and it had affirmed his own approach to life. He felt confident that this principle of observing, waiting, and acting at the right moment would carry him through every challenge, every decision, and every opportunity that lay ahead. The night deepened, and the city's hum faded into a soft stillness. He reflected on the journey he had taken, the challenges he had faced, and the victories that had come from patience and quiet determination. The world often demanded speed and noise, but he had learned that the right answer sometimes required waiting, listening, and observing. His quiet had been more than an absence of sound. It had been a presence that shaped outcomes, influenced people, and brought clarity out of confusion. And in that, he found his strength, his satisfaction, and his answer.